Hey guys, I'm here. Over the weekend, I finally got around to seeing Lightyear, and this finally feels like the first film that Pixar has released here recently that definitely feels like the Disney in what is now Disney's Pixar, as they are attempting to stretch out one of their beloved franchise into infinity and beyond, and we'll see where this whole thing leads. The film was directed and written by Angus MacLane, as well as co-written by two writers from Coco and Onward. With that said, this does feel like a bit of an incomplete film, and I think that comes back around to what I said in the beginning, as they are definitely trying to franchise this. And what started off as a fun little spin-off, I feel like this is them just trying to kind of like milk out a new direction using a brand that we recognize, a name that we recognize, and to kind of shift that into something new and give it a new life. I know there's been talks of Toy Story 5 that were kind of happening and circulating right around the end of Toy Story 4, but I haven't heard anything since then, and this might be just a new direction that they're going with this IP in general. And who knows? This, all things aside, all brand recognition aside, all attachments to the brand aside, this was a very adequate and fun science fiction animation. As per usual, Pixar knocks it out of the park with their stylizations, though I do think this lacks a little bit of that flair that some of their more recent projects have kind of been able to show off, like with Turning Red, Soul, and especially Luca. The film very much sets in its tone in this very science fiction heavy atmosphere, and it works. It works for what it is. It's just like the Pixar itself. They didn't do anything in this movie to really blow me away, though they are pushing the technology further and further and making things more realistic while keeping that stylized animated flair to it. It just didn't wow me like some of their other projects have here recently. And I that's just one of the things about this, is just kind of felt like this was just an average fanfare for me. And I think the same can be said about the story itself, because it is the story we've seen 100,000 times. There's nothing nuanced or brought into this story that really kind of shapes it in a different direction, as we kind of follow the growth and development, kind of the themes that center Buzz's story throughout the journey of this film. And I just think that's one of the things about this that kind of brings it down, because it doesn't feel at its core for me like your typical Pixar film. And that's not always a bad thing. And I think this film is going to satisfy most people that watch it. I think it's going to be just fine for anybody just looking for a thrilling little science fiction adventure, because it does deliver on that. I feel like this is a little bit of a step down, or at least a step backwards for Pixar for me, in what they've tried to accomplish with their name and their brand. And that's why I feel like this feels like a more of a directive coming down from the Disney tops, making them make this push forward. And not to get into any spoilers or anything like that, but the story is also purposefully missing a lot of different elements that they are clearly wanting to explore further and more in more detail in a sequel, as they do sequel bait this film for more, that it leaves a lot of the elements of especially the second and third acts, feeling a little bit hollow, especially with the third act in particular, where the hows and the whys of everything that is going on feel extremely forced and contrived because of the things that have been set up prior to this, and the gaps in our own knowledge surrounding what's going on as well, that are to be answered in the sequel, should one get made. And it just makes this, again, feel like a bit of a hollow cash grab kind of story, where the focus isn't so much on what is being shown to us here, but the franchisability of where this could eventually go. Because everything in this is more of a proto Buzz Lightyear, a proto Star Command, a proto everything else, where we're kind of getting kind of the first arc storyline, where we're seeing the prequel to what Andy saw. And that's another thing that kind of I fall back on, that is a little distracting, because this film opens with some text lines. There's like, in 1995, Andy saw this film that inspired him to get the toy that was based on the movie, or whatever. I don't remember the exact line, but it specified this is that film from 1995 that Andy saw, and this in no way, shape, or form feels like a movie that was made in 1995. This feels 100% like the product of 2022. And that's not just to say in like the sensibilities or representation or anything like that, but the tone, the vibe, the look, the aesthetic. It's just, it doesn't feel like that. This feels exactly like how I described it. A modern Disney trying to reboot a recognizable brand and continue it and milk it. That's what it feels like. There's things that they could have even done to kind of accentuate that theme and maybe kind of make it feel a little bit more in tune with that, because this is not the story that inspired the toy. Like, because we know the story from the toy, the description of Star Command, of Zurg, of everything that was set up from Toy Story 1 and Toy Story 2. This isn't that story. Now, you could easily argue that maybe that this is one of those situations where they maybe like spun the child element a little bit more once they made the toy line. Like, the toy line has a separate story than the film it was based on. But you're telling me a 6-year-old Andy was just swept up by this movie? I don't see it. 6-year-old me would not have been like blown away by this. The first I'd say the first 2/3 of this movie would have put me to sleep as a 6-year-old. The third act probably would have had my attention, but the whole like lead up to that would not have had my attention. That's it, just like it. And again, it feels too clean. Like, where Alien is a sci-fi movie that feels grounded in the era in which it was made, like in the technology, the CRT screens, the way that it looks and feels, the grain of it feels like an 80s science fiction film. They could have done things like that in here to make it feel a little more grounded to the era in which it's meant to be. And there's even some ways they could have artistically wrapped that around that to make it. It's just like this feels at odds with the premise, or that the premise was just an excuse to make this movie and an excuse to kind of bait the audience into this. And again, the movie's not bad. It's just manipulative is all it is. It's out for anybody who's never seen Toy Story, it's going to be perfectly fine. I think this is a perfectly fine science fiction movie. Like I said, it's beautiful. It plays around with a lot of sci-fi elements. It's got a lot of fun characters, though some of them are extremely one note. I think the voice cast is stellar between Chris Evans taking in the role as Buzz. Again, this is Buzz the human, not Buzz the toy, so there is a distinction between not having the OG come back and voice the character here. But we have new characters as well that I found really endearing, particularly Izzy, played by Keke Palmer, and her relationship with Buzz, and her grandmother, played by Uzo Aduba. And just the general voice cast in general, filled out by Peter Sohn, Taika Waititi, Dale Soules, and James Brolin. Everybody does great. I think on the technical level that comes into this, the movie's good. It's serviceable. It's an above average animated film. It's an above average film in general for what we would typically get in theaters. I think this is a really competent film in a lot of ways. It's just based on the premise, the idea, and the legacy that comes with this. There's a lot of disappointment surrounding this, especially with the high expectations that I have from a studio like Pixar. I do also have to say that out of all the characters, the cat, Socks, played by Peter Sohn, is my favorite part of this movie. He easily steals the entire show. He's my favorite new creation for this thing, and honestly, he outshadows every character in this movie. And it's kind of sad to me. Outside of Chris, outside of Buzz and Izzy, I feel like everybody else is just a one-note side character who's there just to kind of get some cheap laughs here and there, and they're not very creative. They're not very well thought out, and they're kind of stock characters. I do think most people, when they watch this, are going to enjoy it. I just don't think that if you're coming at this like a hardcore Toy Story fan, like you grew up with it, if you're a 90s kid and you're like, this is not a 90s movie, like there's going to be things about this movie that are just going to like be more of a nitpick or a gripe or a pet peeve or something like that. This isn't going to be a movie that's overly offensive unless you're one of those people that just cannot tolerate people loving people you don't agree with them loving, which is such a small part of this movie and is such a large point of contention in the just the world right now. Is just still that we're at this place is kind of sad to me, but it was really beautifully handled. And honestly, the story with Izzy, her grandmother and her family, and Buzz's connection with her grandmother and her family was honestly the only bits of the film that got me even somewhat emotional, which with Pixar typically, like they always find a way to make me really weep at times and really like feel these emotional heartstrings being manipulated. And that was the closest that I got to in this film. I never fully got into that emotional pit that I'm so used to getting into with Pixar films. It's just like, yeah, like I said, this feels like very corporate. This feels like very intentional at driving, again, brand recognizability to try to manufacture just a new franchise for them to milk. And I just couldn't not feel that throughout the entire film. And if you're going into this brain turned off, not even turned off, because I think you could think about the deeper concepts of this movie and some of the things there's things you can take away from this film. I don't think this is a turn your brain off movie at all. That was a wrong way to kind of express that. I do think that there's things you could take away from this movie here and there. It's just nothing we haven't seen before. And it's nothing we haven't seen done more fleshed out or nuanced in other things. But at the end of the day, I do think if you go into this and you just kind of tune out that kind of meta awareness of, you know, Disney puppeting from the background, or if you try to disconnect it from the franchise as a whole and the premise that it even kind of sets it up with, because it just completely disregards it by the end of the film, you know, I think you'll enjoy the film just fine. And even so, I enjoyed the movie. It was just a huge letdown in the end. Like not like a Jurassic World Dominion by any stretch of the imagination, but this film it's above average. It was enjoyable. It has some great moments. It was just not what I expect from Pixar. And it's sad to me that this got the theatrical treatment while movies like Turning Red and so forth kind of got left to Disney Plus. And I'm sure more people are going to check this out as it comes and drops on the streaming platforms later. And I'm curious to see what the overall reaction is to the film. I haven't seen many reviews for this because I just haven't been interested. Like, if I'm interested in like the discourse around a film, or if I'm interested in like how people are reading into a film, I'll usually kind of like see what other people are thinking or talking about. But this film, just I haven't been motivated to check out a lot of that stuff, mostly because I'm pretty solid. And this is one of those situations where I've kind of got my feet firm where I in my feelings on this one. So, but guys, what do you think of this film? I'd love to know your thoughts. Sound off the comments. Let me know your thoughts down below. We'll carry on the conversation after the video. Feel free to join us in our Discord. We can talk about it there as well. Links to that and all my socials are down below. Follow me in each and every one of those. Before we go, I want to shout out our channel legends: Manny Share, Jason Coleman, Philly Vane, Yori Coruscant, Margaret Grace, Mary Bradley, Melita, Robert Anguiano, and Cal Kestis Nation. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. That's it for this video, guys, and I'll see you all in the next one. Take care, everybody.